I knew the rain was going to prove her wrong before the sun came up. At 4:30 in the morning, I stood in the open doorway of my barn with a wet envelope in my hand, listening to the old spillway growl beneath the dam my father built before Riverbend Estates ever existed. Cold rain ran off the metal roof in steady silver ropes, hammering the gravel yard, filling the ruts, tapping against the rusted rain gauge that hung beside the door like an old witness. 3¼ inches since midnight. More coming. The creek below my pasture was already high, brown, fast, and loud enough to shake the boards under my boots. Across the valley, the streetlights of Riverbend Estates glowed through the storm, neat little circles of yellow in a neighborhood that looked safe because my land had been catching its overflow for years. Then my phone buzzed again. Another voicemail from Marjorie Whitcomb, president of the Riverbend Estates Homeowners Association. Her voice came through my speaker crisp and calm, the way people sound when they think paperwork makes them powerful. Mr. Price, you have until 5 o'clock today to remove the unauthorized dam structure, or the board will move forward with the full $50,000 fine and lien action. We will not let one private landowner hold this community hostage. I looked down at the violation letter in my hand, its ink softening at the edges from the rain. Unauthorized structure. That was what she called it. Not the permitted retention dam my father built after the flood of 1998. Not the spillway the county inspected. Not the earth berm that slowed stormwater before it rushed toward the low streets below. To Marjorie, it was ugly. It interrupted the clean view from her walking trail. It appeared in the background of the glossy Riverbend brochure like a reminder that the land above her perfect subdivision belonged to someone else. My name is Nolan Price. I am a civil drainage contractor, and I have spent 22 years reading water before it reads people the hard way. Water does not care about board votes. It does not care about landscaping committees, matching mailboxes, Lakeview marketing, or the tone of a certified letter. Water goes where grade, gravity, soil, pipe size, and maintenance tell it to go. My dam did not steal anything from Riverbend Estates. It had been protecting them for free. I stepped out into the rain and walked toward the creek bank, my flashlight cutting across wet grass, fence posts, and the old concrete spillway wall. The rusted rain gauge swung behind me in the wind. At the bottom of the slope, the dam held back a wide sheet of stormwater, sending it through the spillway slow enough that the channel below could breathe. Beyond that channel were Riverbend's lower culverts, their clubhouse parking lot, their decorative pond, and the streets Marjorie claimed had no dependence on my property. Lightning flashed over the valley, and for one clean second I saw everything. My father's dam, the swollen creek, the subdivision lights, and Marjorie's white sport utility vehicle parked near the trail gate on the far side, as if she had come to make sure fear did what her fine could not. What she did not know was that I had already pulled the old permits, the flood maps, the deed records, and the drainage easement index. If she wanted the dam gone, I would not tear it down in anger. I would remove it legally, under county supervision, exactly the way her letter demanded. And when the water stopped being held back by my land, it would not be revenge. It would be a map. By 6 that morning, the rain had slowed to a cold mist, and I was at the kitchen table with mud on my boots, coffee cooling beside my elbow, and every old drainage record my father ever saved spread across the oak boards. My sister Claire used to joke that our family did not keep photo albums. We kept permits, and looking at that table, she was not wrong. There were county inspection slips in yellowed folders, deed maps with creek lines drawn in blue pencil, culvert receipts, spillway repair notes, and a faded photograph of my father standing beside the finished earth berm in 1998, one hand on a shovel, the other pointing toward the low valley where Riverbend Estates would not be built for another 7 years. The rusted rain gauge hung outside the window, ticking softly whenever wind pushed it against the barn siding. I could still hear my father's voice from when I was 12, standing ankle deep in that same pasture after a summer storm. A dam is not a wall, Nolan. It is a promise to slow water down long enough for people below you to stay dry. He never built it to impress anyone. He built it because the creek came down off the ridge too fast, ripped through the pasture, chewed out the gravel road, and dumped everything toward the county drainage channel. The county approved the retention work because it reduced peak flow. That phrase had sounded boring when I was a kid. Now it was the difference between truth and a $50,000 lie. By 7, Claire arrived in her old blue sedan with a rain jacket over her arm and a bakery box she forgot to open because she saw the violation letter first. She read Marjorie Whitcomb's signature, then looked through the window toward the dam. They are calling Dad's structure unauthorized? They are calling it ugly with legal language. Claire pulled out her laptop. Then we start with dates. That was how our family handled panic. We made a timeline. I gave her the original permit number, the county maintenance notes, the photographs of the spillway, and the emails Marjorie had sent over the last 6 months complaining that the dam ruined the view from the Riverbend walking trail. One message called it a visual obstruction to community enjoyment. Another suggested I landscape the berm with decorative grasses approved by their architectural committee, even though the berm sat entirely on my land, outside their subdivision, outside their covenants, outside their authority. The irony was sitting right there in the flood map. Riverbend Estates had been graded into a shallow bowl below my pasture, with lower streets, a clubhouse parking lot, and a decorative pond that looked pretty in brochures but was too small to handle a serious storm. Their system worked only because my dam held back the first rush. They never maintained it. They never paid for it. They never thanked us for it. But every spring, their newsletter showed families walking beside dry trails and called it thoughtful community planning. I walked Claire to the barn, and together we looked down at the swollen water pressing against the spillway. It was controlled, patient, loud but disciplined. Beyond it, Riverbend's rooftops sat under the mist like pieces on a game board. Claire folded her arms. If they force removal, they lose the buffer. That is exactly what I warned them. Did you warn them in writing? I handed her a certified letter receipt from 2 weeks earlier. Her eyebrows lifted. Good. Then my phone buzzed again. Marjorie had sent another email, copying the entire Homeowners Association board. The subject line read Final Demand for Illegal Dam Removal. Claire read it, then looked at the rain gauge outside the barn. 3.5 inches now. She handed the phone back carefully. Then let us make sure they own every word they just wrote. At 8:15, the mist lifted enough for Riverbend Estates to look perfect again from a distance, which was exactly how Marjorie Whitcomb liked it. From my upper pasture, I could see the curve of their walking trail, the clubhouse deck shining with rainwater, the decorative pond reflecting gray clouds, and the neat rows of townhomes arranged around low streets that had been sold as peaceful creekside living. Their entrance sign was carved stone, their mailboxes matched, their lawns were clipped tight, and every spring the Homeowners Association newsletter called the place a model of thoughtful design. I had read those words enough times to know what they left out. Thoughtful design did not include the undersized culvert beneath Willow Bend Drive. It did not include the shallow retention pond behind the clubhouse that filled too quickly in a hard storm. It did not include the old natural swale they narrowed with landscaping beds because Marjorie wanted a cleaner view from the trail. And it definitely did not include my father's dam, even though that dam had been quietly slowing water before it reached them for years. Marjorie built her authority the same way Riverbend built its brochures, polished, confident, and carefully angled away from the low spots. She was the kind of Homeowners Association president who walked the trail every morning in a cream raincoat with a tablet tucked under one arm, stopping to straighten signs, inspect mulch lines, and remind residents that consistency preserved value. I had seen her stand on that clubhouse deck during open houses, pointing up toward my pasture and calling the hillside a scenic conservation backdrop, as if my land existed to complete her view. When she wanted something, she softened the first request with community language. When that failed, she reached for fines. 6 months earlier, she had visited my gate with 2 board members, a glossy Riverbend folder, and a smile that did not reach her eyes. Nolan, the association has received concerns about that berm structure, she said, nodding toward the dam like she was discussing a junk car. It disrupts the natural appearance of the creek corridor. I asked her whether Riverbend had a drainage easement over my land. She glanced at the board member beside her. This is not about easements. This is about community impact. I asked whether they had a maintenance agreement for the structure they were complaining about. She said the board was not responsible for private improvements. I asked whether they understood what the dam did during a storm. She smiled then, small and cold. Our engineers designed Riverbend properly. We do not depend on your property. That sentence came back to me now as Claire and I stood by the barn watching water slide through the spillway in controlled sheets. The rusted rain gauge read almost 4 inches, and the creek was still rising. Claire had printed Marjorie's latest email, and the paper shook slightly in the wind as she read it aloud. Final demand. Unauthorized obstruction, aesthetic harm, potential lien, immediate removal required. She keeps calling it aesthetic, Claire said, because admitting drainage would make it her problem. Down below, a white sport utility vehicle stopped near the trail gate. Marjorie stepped out, cream raincoat bright against the wet grass, tablet in hand, looking up at my dam with the irritated expression of someone staring at a fact that refused to dress nicely. She raised her phone, took pictures, then pointed toward the spillway while one of her board members nodded beside her. They were not watching the lower culvert. They were not watching the pond. They were watching the one structure still protecting them from the storm they had dismissed. I folded the violation letter, slid it into my jacket, and looked at Claire. She thinks the dam is ruining her view. Claire looked down at Riverbend's low streets and the water already shining along the curb lines. Then wait until she sees the view without it. By 9 o'clock, Marjorie Whitcomb had driven from the trail gate to my gravel entrance with 2 board members behind her and a glossy Riverbend Estates folder tucked under one arm like a shield. The rain had eased into a fine mist, but the creek still roared below the pasture, steady and full, pressing against the spillway the way it always did when the hills sent too much water downhill at once. Claire stood beside me near the barn, her laptop bag over one shoulder, while the rusted rain gauge clicked against the siding in the wind. For inches. My father would have written that number on the calendar before breakfast. Marjorie stopped at the locked farm gate and did not step past it, because even she understood where her authority ended physically, though she had trouble understanding where it ended legally. "Mr. Price," she called through the bars, "this has gone far enough." I walked down the slope with the violation letter in my hand, mud pulling at my boots, the smell of wet clay and creek water rising from the ground. Behind Marjorie, one board member held an umbrella, and the other filmed with a phone angled carefully to include my dam in the background. She wanted a record of control. I wanted a record of words. So I started my own recording before I got close. "You sent the final demand this morning," I said. "I did," she replied, "and the board expects compliance." She opened the folder and pulled out a fresh notice with my name typed across the top. $50,000 in fines. Threat of lien. Demand for removal. Reference to architectural harmony, creek corridor appearance, community safety, and unauthorized obstruction. It was amazing how many phrases people could stack when they did not have a recorded right. "Before we discuss anything else," I said, "show me the drainage easement." Marjorie blinked once. "This is not an easement issue. Show me the maintenance agreement." Her mouth tightened. "The association is not responsible for maintaining your private structure. Show me the contract that gives Riverbend Estates control over stormwater retention on Price land." One of the board members lowered his umbrella slightly. Marjorie looked past me toward the dam, where water slid in gray sheets through the spillway. "You are deliberately complicating a simple violation. A dam that predates your subdivision, approved by the county, sitting on private land outside your covenants, is not simple because you call it ugly." She lifted her chin. "The board has determined that the structure affects the community. If you refuse removal, the association will pursue every remedy available." Claire stepped closer, but said nothing. I could feel her listening the way I listened to water, catching each phrase before it disappeared. "And if I comply?" I asked. Marjorie's confidence returned. "Then this matter can end peacefully." I let that sentence sit between us while the creek thundered below. "If you are officially demanding removal, I will follow county process. I will hire an engineer, file the permit, notify all affected parties, set erosion controls, document every step, and remove only what the county approves." Her smile came back, thin and victorious. "Good. That is all we have ever asked." No, it was not. She had asked for control without responsibility. She had asked my land to keep protecting hers while she punished me for the structure doing it. I folded the fresh notice and slid it into the same plastic sleeve as the first. "Then you understand that once the permitted removal is complete, the water will follow the natural drainage path. Riverbend has its own drainage system," she said. "We do not rely on your dam." The rusted rain gauge clicked again behind me, sharp as a little warning bell. I looked at the lower streets of Riverbend shining through the mist and nodded. Then, You should have no problem putting that in writing. The moment Marjorie drove away, I stopped thinking like a landowner and started thinking like the contractor I had been for 22 years. Emotion makes you want to answer a threat. Drainage work teaches you to answer with measurements. Claire and I turned the barn into a field office before the mist had fully lifted, sliding the truck tailgate down, spreading plastic sleeves over the wet boards, and taping a fresh sheet of paper to the wall beneath my father's rusted rain gauge. 4 inches and 1/8. Creek level at the spillway lip, 14 inches below overtopping. Lower channel moving fast, but clear. Wind out of the north. Soil saturated. I wrote each note with a black marker while Claire scanned the violation notice, Marjorie's email, the old county permit, the deed, the flood map, and the original inspection slip from 1998. Every document had a sound in that barn. Paper scraping against plastic, laptop keys clicking, rain ticking off the gutters, creek water grinding over stone below us. I walked the pasture with a measuring rod and marked the water line against the old cedar post my father had used as a creek gauge. Then I sent up my small survey drone from the gravel yard, not for drama, not for spying, just for a legal overhead view of what gravity had been doing long before Riverbend Estates sold its first house. The footage showed it plainly. Water came off the ridge, spread into the retention pool behind our dam, slowed at the spillway, then narrowed into the county channel that curved toward Riverbend. Down below, the association's lower culvert under Willow Bend Drive looked like a straw in a bathtub. The decorative pond behind the clubhouse was already near its edge, and the landscaped swale Marjorie loved to photograph had been pinched by flower beds, stone edging, and a walking path that turned a working drainage route into something pretty but weak. I measured the culvert on public right-of-way with a tape, took photographs from the road shoulder, and compared it to the stormwater plan Claire found in the county archive. The approved drawing showed a wider open swale. The current layout showed mulch, shrubs, and a narrow stone-lined channel barely half the original width. They dressed up their drainage until it forgot how to drain, Claire said, standing beside me with her hood pulled tight. Back in the barn, she opened a folder of emails that Eleanor Brooks, a Riverbend resident, had quietly forwarded after Marjorie copied the board on the final demand. One name kept appearing: Victor Lane, the contractor who had repaired Riverbend's clubhouse pond 2 years earlier. His message was blunt enough to make the barn feel colder. If Price ever removes or breaches the upstream retention dam, Riverbend lower streets may experience rapid ponding during heavy rain events. Current culverts are undersized for unretained flow. Recommend immediate drainage study and written agreement with upstream owner. Claire read it once, then again, softer. They knew. I looked at the rain gauge, at the dam, at the valley. They knew and find me anyway. Another email followed, this one from Marjorie to the board. Do not reference dependency on the price structure in resident communications. Treat the matter as aesthetics and unauthorized improvement. That was the moment the whole story shifted. This was no longer about a mistake. This was about a board that had been using my father's dam as free flood control while telling residents they did not rely on it. I called attorney Rachel Mercer and sent her the folder. She answered 10 minutes later, her voice calm but sharper than the rain. Nolan, preserve everything. Do not remove a board, stone, or spillway piece until the county engineer is present. And send Marjorie one more certified notice. Saying what? I asked. Rachel paused, saying that if they continue demanding lawful removal, they are confirming they have been warned of the drainage consequences. I looked down at the swollen creek and the quiet homes below it. Marjorie wanted the dam gone because it ruined her view. The records were about to show that the view was the only thing standing between Riverbend and the water they had refused to respect. Rachel Mercer's certified notice went out at 11:42 that morning, and I remember the exact time because the rain stopped just as the printer finished spitting out the last copy. The barn smelled like wet hay, engine oil, damp paper, and creek mud, all of it mixing with the cold air rolling up from the pasture. Claire stood at the tailgate with her laptop open, building a folder so clean it looked like it had been prepared for court instead of a muddy hillside. At the top was Marjorie's final demand. Under it were the county permit from 1998, the deed showing the dam sat entirely on Price land, the flood map, the drone footage, Victor Lane's warning email, the altered swale photographs, and my own certified warning from 2 weeks earlier. Rachel's new letter was simple enough that even a board trying not to understand it could not miss the meaning. If Riverbend Estates continued demanding removal of the upstream retention structure, I would seek county authorization and remove only what the county approved, under engineering supervision, with erosion control and full documentation. Riverbend Estates had been warned that once the private structure stopped retaining stormwater, water would follow the natural drainage path toward their own system, and the association would remain responsible for the condition, capacity, and maintenance of its culverts, swales, pond, and streets. Rachel read the final paragraph to us over speakerphone while I watched the creek push brown water through the spillway. "This is not an admission of liability by Mr. Price," she said. "This is notice that your demand may expose the association's existing drainage deficiencies." Claire looked at me and mouthed, "Good." I signed the copy, scanned it, and sent it by certified mail, electronic delivery, and overnight courier because people like Marjorie always claimed not to receive the sentence that mattered. Then we waited. Not long. At 1:06 in the afternoon, Marjorie replied from her homeowners association account, copying the full board, the management company, and, for reasons only pride could explain, 3 residents from the landscaping committee. Her message began with disappointment, moved through community standards, paused at visual nuisance, and ended with the line that would follow her into the meeting later. Riverbend Estates does not depend on private property for stormwater management. Claire read it aloud once, then printed 3 copies without saying a word. Rachel was quieter on the phone than I expected. "That sentence is important," she said. "Save the original with headers." "Already done," Claire answered. By 2:30, County Engineer Paul Hargrove arrived in a county pickup with mud on the tires and rolled plans in a plastic tube. Paul had inspected half the drainage work in our county, and he had the slow eyes of a man who trusted slopes more than speeches. We walked him from the rain gauge to the spillway, from the spillway to the channel, from the channel down to the public road where Riverbend's lower culvert sat half-choked with leaves, silt, and decorative stone washed from their own landscaping beds. He measured the culvert opening, checked the grade, photographed the narrowed swale, and stared for a long moment at the clubhouse pond sitting high against its bank. "Your dam reduces peak flow," he said. "That is what the original permit says. Can they force me to maintain it for them?" I asked. "Not without an agreement. Can they find me under their covenants?" He looked up toward my barn, then down toward Riverbend. "Not if the structure is outside their jurisdiction." Claire showed him Marjorie's email. Paul read the sentence about not depending on private property, then looked at the undersized culvert below us. "Then their system needs to prove it." By late afternoon, Rachel filed the county removal application exactly as Marjorie had demanded, attaching every warning, every map, every photograph, and every email. I stood by the barn as the rusted rain gauge swung in the wind, thinking about my father's promise to slow water down. Marjorie had mistaken that promise for weakness. Now the paperwork was going to ask gravity a question she had already answered in writing. The county approved the removal permit at 8:19 the next morning, and by 8:30 I had already printed 4 copies because I knew Marjorie Whitcomb would treat 1 copy like an opinion and 2 copies like a mistake. The sky was pale gray, the kind of heavy morning that holds rain behind its teeth, and the rusted rain gauge beside the barn still showed 4 inches and 1/8 from the first storm. More weather was moving in by midnight. I could feel it in the air, in the low pressure over the pasture, in the way the creek kept talking even after the clouds had thinned. County Engineer Paul Hargrove arrived first, followed by my removal crew in 2 trucks carrying erosion control wattles, hay bales, equipment mats, orange safety fencing, silk curtains, and hand tools. This was not demolition in anger. This was controlled removal under a permit, photographed from every angle, measured at every step, and slow enough that even the water had time to understand the change. Claire stood near the barn with a camera on a tripod, filming the gate, the dam, the spillway, and the county placard I had posted on a wooden stake where nobody could claim they missed it. Attorney Rachel Mercer stayed on speakerphone from her office, reviewing each step as Paul read the permit conditions aloud. Remove spillway boards in sequence. Lower retained water gradually. Maintain erosion control. Do not alter downstream channel beyond permitted limits. Preserve photo documentation. Notify affected downstream property owner. I had done that part twice. Marjorie had answered in writing that Riverbend Estates did not depend on private property. At 9:10, we began removing the first spillway board. Water shifted, not in a rush, not in chaos, just a deeper, heavier slide through the opening. The sound changed from a growl to a hard, steady pull, and I thought of my father standing there in 1998, building something to slow a problem nobody below us wanted to understand. By 10, the second board was out. By 11, the retained pool had dropped several inches, and the water was moving cleanly through the natural channel toward Riverbend. That was when Marjorie arrived in her white sport utility vehicle with 2 board members, the management company representative and Deputy Alan Pierce behind them. She stepped out in a cream raincoat, holding my violation notice like it outranked the county permit. "This work must stop," she called from the gate. "He is endangering the community." Paul turned before I did. "This is permitted county-supervised removal." Marjorie pointed toward the channel. "He is changing the water flow." I walked to the gate with mud on my boots and a copy of the permit in a plastic sleeve. "I am complying with your written demand." Deputy Pierce took the permit, read it, then looked at Paul. "You are overseeing this?" "Yes," Paul said. "And Riverbend was notified?" Claire held up the delivery receipts. Rachel's voice came through my phone, calm and clean. "They were notified by certified mail, electronic delivery, overnight courier, and direct email." Marjorie's face tightened. "I demanded removal of the illegal structure, not a drainage event." Paul looked down toward Riverbend's lower culvert, where water was already running faster than it had in years. "The drainage event was always there, Mrs. Whitcomb. The structure was slowing it." For the first time all week, she did not answer. The crew went back to work. Every board came out on camera. Every stone adjustment was measured. Every erosion control barrier was checked. By late afternoon, the dam my father built was no longer holding back Riverbend's overflow for free. The creek had its old voice again, open and direct, carrying water down the natural path shown on every map Marjorie had ignored. The rusted rain gauge clicked in the wind above the barn, empty now but waiting. And far down in the valley, under clouds gathering for the second storm, Riverbend Estates sat polished, low, and unprotected by the truth it had ordered me to remove. The second storm arrived after midnight with no drama except the kind that water makes when nobody is listening. I was in the barn before the first heavy band crossed the ridge, wearing the same mud-stained jacket, watching my father's rusted rain gauge catch each cold drop under the yellow work light. 1 inch by 1240, 2 by 130, 3 by 215. The numbers climbed while the valley disappeared into rain, and for the first time in my life, the creek below my pasture was not being slowed by the dam my father built. It moved through the open channel with a voice I had only heard in old stories, fast but natural, direct but not angry, following the grade shown on every county map. I had not pointed water at Riverbend Estates. I had not cut a ditch. I had not touched their land. I had done exactly what their president demanded, under permit, under inspection, with every warning delivered and every step recorded. Gravity did the rest. Claire stood beside me with her hood up, filming the rain gauge, the open spillway area, the erosion controls, and the water moving cleanly through the channel. At 3:07, my phone buzzed with the first message from Eleanor Brooks. It was a photo from Willow Bend Drive. Water was spreading over the curb near the lower culvert, shining under streetlights like dark glass. 10 minutes later, another photo came through. The clubhouse parking lot had started to pond. At 3:32, the decorative retention pond behind the clubhouse touched the top of its bank. By 4, Riverbend's walking trail was covered in shallow water, the same trail Marjorie had wanted cleared of the ugly view from my property. I watched from the barn doorway, not with satisfaction, but with the heavy feeling of seeing a warning become visible too late. Water was not choosing sides. It was going exactly where Paul Hargrove had said it would go, where Victor Lane had warned it would go, where the old flood map had always shown it would go once my private structure stopped reducing peak flow. At 4:20, Marjorie called me. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was not crisp this time. It shook under the sound of rain hitting glass. "Mr. Price, water is entering Riverbend from your property. You need to restore whatever you removed immediately." I saved the message without answering. Rachel had told me not to debate emergencies by phone, and Paul had already notified the county stormwater desk that the association's lower system was showing failure under unretained flow. By 5, county crews were at the public road checking the culvert. Their headlights cut through rain and steam rising from the pavement. Leaves, silt, decorative stone, and mulch were packed against the grate, exactly where Paul had photographed buildup the day before. The culvert was not just undersized. It was neglected. The narrowed swale carried water into a landscaped choke point, and the clubhouse pond had no room left to pretend it was engineering. Dawn came gray and cold. From my upper pasture, Riverbend Estates looked nothing like its brochure. The lower streets were covered in shallow, standing water. The clubhouse lot reflected the sky, and the walking trail disappeared beneath a smooth brown sheet that marked every low place Marjorie had denied. No homes were shown in danger from where I stood. No chaos, no spectacle, just an entire drainage system exposed by the storm it was supposed to manage. Claire lowered the camera and looked at the rain gauge. 4 3/4 inches. Dad's dam was holding back more than water, she said. I looked down at Riverbend, then at the empty place where the spillway boards used to be. It was holding back their lie. By 8 that morning, Riverbend Estates had called an emergency meeting in the clubhouse, and the room felt smaller than any room with tall windows and Lakeview brochures had a right to feel. The rain had stopped, but everyone had carried it in with them. Damp jackets, wet shoes, mud on cuffs, the smell of coffee, standing water, and panic disguised as questions. Outside the glass doors, the clubhouse parking lot still held shallow water in long silver sheets, and the walking trail Marjorie had fought so hard to beautify was marked off with orange cones from the county. I sat near the front with Rachel Mercer on my right, Claire on my left, and my father's rusted rain gauge on the table between the folders because Claire said the room needed to see what had been telling the truth all along. Marjorie sat at the board table in her cream raincoat, face pale, tablet flat in front of her, trying to look like the person in charge of a storm that had already testified against her. She opened by saying Riverbend Estates had experienced an unexpected drainage impact from upstream activity. Rachel stood before Marjorie could turn that phrase into another lie. For the record, she said, the upstream activity was permitted removal of a private retention structure demanded in writing by this association. The projector clicked on. First came Marjorie's violation letter, $50,000, threat of lien, unauthorized obstruction, aesthetic harm. Then my certified warning from 2 weeks earlier. Then Rachel's notice explaining that removal would restore unretained natural flow and Riverbend would remain responsible for its own stormwater system. Then Marjorie's reply, enlarged until nobody could pretend they missed it. Riverbend Estates does not depend on private property for stormwater management. The room shifted. A man in the second row whispered something under his breath. Eleanor Brooks stood with a folder in her hands, and when Rachel asked how long the board had known about the drainage risk, Eleanor walked forward and handed over the emails from Victor Lang. His warning filled the screen next. If Price ever removes the upstream retention dam, Riverbend lower streets may experience rapid ponding during heavy rain events. Current culverts are undersized for unretained flow. Recommend immediate drainage study and written agreement with upstream owner. Someone near the back said they knew. County engineer Paul Hargrove stood by the wall with his arms folded, mud still dried on his boots from the morning inspection. Rachel asked him whether my removal had followed the permit. Yes, he said. Was the association notified? Yes. Did Mr. Price alter Riverbend property? No. What caused the ponding? Paul looked at the board table, then at the residents. The association's drainage system received natural flow it was not adequately sized or maintained to handle. The upstream dam had been reducing that peak flow. Marjorie tried to interrupt. That dam was not our responsibility. I picked up the rusted rain gauge, felt the rough metal against my palm, and set it back down slowly. That is exactly the point. You treated it like an eyesore when it was mine, and like infrastructure when it was gone. The room went quiet in the way a room goes quiet when the sentence everyone avoided finally arrives. Claire played the drone footage next. The open channel, the undersized culvert, the narrowed swale, the decorative stone, the clogged grate, the clubhouse pond at its edge. Then came the voicemail from Marjorie at 4:20 in the morning asking me to restore what she had forced me to remove. No one needed commentary after that. Residents began asking why dues had gone to trail landscaping instead of culvert upgrades, why the drainage study was ignored, why the board hid dependency on my land, and why I was fined for a structure protecting them. Marjorie looked down at her tablet, as if a better version of events might still be hiding there. But the screen behind her showed the rain gauge at 4¾ inches, the waterline on the lower street, and her own words in black and white. The flood had entered Riverbend through their neglected system, but the truth entered through their records. 3 days after the emergency meeting, the board voted to withdraw every dollar of the fine, cancel the lien threat, reimburse my legal fees, pay the county review costs, and fund the drainage study they should have ordered 2 years earlier. They did it in a room that still smelled faintly of damp carpet and wet paper, with residents packed shoulder to shoulder, and the projector showing one final image. My father's rusted rain gauge beside the barn, 4¾ inches marked in black on the storm log. Marjorie Whitcomb did not make the motion. She sat silent while another board member read the corrective resolution aloud, each word stripping away the authority she had tried to borrow from fear. Riverbend Estates acknowledged that the dam had been a private retention structure on Price land, outside Homeowners Association control, approved by county records, and not subject to their architectural rules. They acknowledged that removal had been requested by their own written demand, completed under county permit, and supervised by county engineer Paul Hargrove. They acknowledged that their culverts, swale, decorative pond, and maintenance practices were inadequate for unretained natural flow. The sentence everyone waited for came near the end. The association retracts all statements implying Mr. Price caused the drainage failure. I looked at Claire when they read it. She did not smile. She just closed the folder with both hands, like finally shutting a door that had been banging in the wind for too long. Marjorie resigned before the meeting ended. The announcement was dressed in soft language about transition and community healing, but nobody in that room mistook it for anything else. The emails, the ignored contractor warning, the hidden dependency, the fine, the morning voicemail asking me to restore what she had forced me to remove, all of it had taken the clean image she protected and pulled it down to the foundation. Over the next month, Riverbend looked less like a brochure and more like a work site. Crews widened the swale, removed the decorative stone choke point, cleared the lower culvert, rebuilt the clubhouse pond outlet, and posted county permit placards where flower banners used to hang. Their new board sent residents a plain letter explaining that stormwater infrastructure could not be replaced by landscaping, denial, or private land they did not own. Rachel kept a copy for my file. Claire framed the retraction as a joke, then admitted she was only half joking. As for my land, the county gave me permission to leave the old dam removed or apply for a new private retention design with a maintenance agreement if Riverbend ever wanted to share responsibility legally. I chose to wait. For the first time in years, my pasture was not quietly serving as free insurance for a neighborhood that called me a nuisance. I mounted a new sign at the barn gate beneath the rusted rain gauge. Private drainage structure removed under county permit. No homeowners association control. County records govern. The first morning after the repairs were finished, I stood in the same barn doorway where the story had started. The air smelled like wet grass and clean mud. The creek moved below me, steady and honest, no longer carrying someone else's lie on my father's work. Across the valley, Riverbend streets were dry because they had finally built what they should have built in the first place. I touched the rusted rain gauge, still rough from years of storms, and thought about Marjorie's first threat. She believed a $50,000 fine could make me protect her quietly. Instead, her own demand taught an entire neighborhood what my father knew all along. Water follows the truth, and the truth always finds the low ground.